Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Burswood-on-Swan, fabulous place to be today, and a very bright place to be. So if anyone wasn't awake when they walked in here, they will be now. My name's Rob Delane. I'm Director General of the Department of Agriculture and Food. I am going to use some superpowers this morning. I'm going to do a couple of roles. I've got a role doing a brief introduction for you, but then I'll actually introduce myself to talk on behalf of Minister Terry Redman, who is unable to be with us this morning, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Some housekeeping first. I'd like to acknowledge the first Australians, on whose land we meet today, and whose cultures we celebrate as amongst the oldest continuing cultures in human history. Welcome to the 2011 Innovation Workshop, with a focus on partnerships and innovation. I would also like to welcome people from around the regions of Western Australia who are participating today by web conferencing. Congratulations to you for taking an initiative to participate without having to be here physically. 2011 workshop follows last year's highly successful inaugural public sector workshop focused on innovation. The information gathered from that workshop, and it was very substantial and very creative, has been shared right across the sector and in fact around the world, and has contributed to thinking in public sector departments in all corners of Western Australia and being shared elsewhere. It has, I know, been picked up by Directors General and CEOs. It's also gone into the middle of organisations and is contributing to develop a more innovative approach and culture within our sector. It's also been picked up by the team that's working on developing a plan for improved innovation, a more orderly approach than our initial work for action right across the sector in a sustained way. As you all know, and as I've just announced, this year's focus on partnerships and collaboration, and you'll hear from highly credentialed speakers today the criticality of partnerships and collaboration for effective and rapid innovation. We, as occurred last year, we've asked organisations to submit examples of their innovative partnerships and collaborations, the incredibly clever work that they're doing, and that has formed part of the case studies, a booklet, which we had very positive feedback on last year, and I'm sure we'll have exactly the same this year. The booklets can be sourced on the little green Lego, so if you're not feeling young enough already, you can play for that little Lego block, which is a USB stick in your delegate bag. I want to give particular thanks to the organisations who have submitted those examples and help expand all of our minds and give us ideas about how we can tackle the work that we're responsible for the West Australian community. I also want to acknowledge the sponsors of this event, Departments of Commerce, Communities. I'd like to acknowledge the Director General Jenny Perkins, who is here today with us, Indigenous Affairs, Premier and Cabinet, Mines and Petroleum, Landgate, my own department, Department of Agriculture and Food. Australia's Post is also a supporter of this event, and our conference organiser, Zipper. I think it's important that we do highlight some of the heroes. I think they might all be wearing Superman shirts, but people who are involved in organising this event: for Gerard Lee from Department of Commerce, Susan Gallagher from Department of Communities, Laura Gladstone from Department of Indigenous Affairs, Brett Rogers from Landgate, Pia Turkinov from Enterprise Connect, Marion Birchall from DAFWA, Annabelle Mazzella, who used to be at Australia Post and now with us, has also played an important role, and of course Audrey Young and Michelle Bai from IPA. Of course, nothing happens without people, and the public service is all about people, so thank you very much to those people. So if I can just jump into the telephone booth for a moment and pretend that I'm Minister Terry Redman. If you follow the news, you'll know that we're getting close to Christmas, and there's a lot of pressure and a lot of tension in the parliaments around our country, and they sitting till 3 o'clock in the morning in Canberra, and a bit of tension in the West Australian Parliament as well, which has resulted in all pairs. In other words, where one member of the Parliament needs to go and do other business, and the other side of the Parliament agrees that they'll have someone not participate in voting as well. That's all been cancelled. So Minister Redman needs to be in the Parliament this morning, is unable to be with us. There's a whole lot of reasons why he would have loved to have been with us. One, I think he's younger than me. He and I were also recently in Japan, and we were taken to a ninja restaurant. So he would have been getting pretty fired up by now, I think, with the introductory music that we've had. But most importantly, he would have been very pleased to be here because he is very strongly committed to a creative future, to the necessary decisions that he as a Minister of the Government needs to make to create an environment under which his departments that he's responsible for and the industry sectors that he's responsible for can flourish. And that's been very evident to those of us who work closely with him in recent times. He's also now Minister for Corrective Services. He's applied his mind to that. He is always looking for innovative opportunities, ways in which we might address some of the very significant challenges that exist in his agriculture and food, his forestries and his corrective services portfolio. And in fact he's challenged Ian Johnson from Corrective Services and myself to think about ways that we can actually work together cleverly in different ways than has happened before. So if he was here, I think he'd be saying pretty much that he wished he was here because of his commitment to innovation, and he'd like to congratulate people involved in that in the public sector. It's my pleasure to acknowledge the speakers for today. Honourable David Bartlett, former Premier of Tasmania and former Minister for Innovation, Science and Technology. Professor Lynn Beasley, I haven't seen, is usually bouncing around in a superwoman suit, Chief Scientist from Western Australia. Dr Terry Cutler, Principal of Cutler and Company, who is an icon in Australian innovation, and I encourage you to listen very carefully to him and the other speakers. To David Shy, the Manager of Department of Transport New South Wales. To Carolyn Curtis, from Family by Family Director from the Australian Centre of Social Innovation. Brodie McCulloch, General Manager of Social Innovation in Western Australia. And Alex Roberts from Department of Innovation, Industry, Science and Research in Canberra. Very special welcome to our guests here to the west. Everyone in Australia will have heard our Premier tell everyone just what a wonderful place it is, a place that I call paradise in China's time zone. I can't imagine why you'd want to live anywhere else, so congratulations at least sampling Western Australia. I've already acknowledged the workshop partners, and Minister Redman would have done that with some enthusiasm, so I'll leave that. In congratulating the organisers of this year's workshop, Minister Redman would have spent, I think, most of his talk and probably thrown away most of his notes telling stories about how critical it is and what wonderful examples there are of highly committed and creative public servants that are tackling the large, sometimes wicked, and certainly very interesting challenges that are confronting our community. It's pretty clear that the global community faces many challenges, and many other communities face much bigger challenges than our own. If you're listening to the radio on the way here this morning, you will have heard stories about riots in Egypt. You will have also heard stories about increasing credibility given to some pretty scary scenarios in Europe, that place that a lot of us, our families, hail from, and where we thought was a sort of rock of the world. It seems to be having some cracks. Western Australia has weathered the global financial crisis and recent challenges in the world much better than just about anywhere else in the world. And the newspaper today talks about that if Western Australia was a country, it would be in the top 50 economies in the world. I mean, that's an amazing statistic. You only have to walk down the street to hear the number of European voices of people who have recently arrived in Western Australia to participate in that economy because their own economy back home is not particularly challenging, to know how vibrant the Western Australian economy is. But of course it's not without its challenges. The old triple bottom line language, which we don't hear so much anymore, is clearly evident here. Getting the economic and the social and environmental balance right is challenging for individual organisations. It's challenging for a whole community, particularly one which is on a pretty wild economic ride, such as our community is. Minister Redmond would also argue that it's critical to sustain the prosperity and the strength of our community and its ability to do things, to not rest on our laurels. There is plenty of evidence from around the world over history that says the time to really think about how to move forward is when things are good. It's so easy just to enjoy that period and a little less pressure. But if you don't, if you like, make the best of that period and your ability to tackle challenges which are less evident but nonetheless are there in your community, then they will confront you right in your face when conditions are tougher. And we all, I think, appreciate that that will come. The WA public sector faces lots of challenges even in these very good times. We have an ageing workforce, and we have intense skills competition from the private sector and increasing competition between our own departments. We have demand for new services and new delivery models. We have a private sector that is charging forward at a rate which is extremely difficult for us to keep up with. There is demand for publicly funded infrastructure and services like we've never seen before and in places we've never seen before. There are also rapid changes in technology and an expectation from our stakeholders, whether they're baby boomers or Gen Ys, for the sector to keep up with that technological change. So, and as we head to the end of the year, I know a lot of public servants who are feeling rather pressured and rather tired, but I think it's rather nice for us to get away from our desks for a day and come here by the river and think about clever ways that we can work together that's going to make the addressing of those challenges that much easier, that much quicker and that much more rewarding. Mr Redmond wouldn't miss the opportunity to talk about agriculture and food if he's here, so I'll just talk about the sorts of rollercoaster challenges, innovation challenges that the world can face. Traditionally, and we're going back many, many years, 20% of the world's population was supported by 80% of the population that farmed. Of course, we're talking about hundreds of years ago, but it was a time when agriculture was king, because food was absolutely critical and didn't arrive in the fridge without people knowing where it came from. But innovations led to innovations in agriculture, such as a process that enabled the development of fertiliser, the Haber-Bosch process, that meant that agriculture could be much more productive, more efficient, and could supply food to the community in a much better way, to the point that that in some developed countries, 98% of the population is supported by the 2% who actually farm. A huge swing around. Of course, that sort of innovation has enabled the world to expand very rapidly. So with an exponential increase in world population from 1.6 billion in 1900 to 7 billion this year, and of course growing. So here we have fantastic innovation in food production, which has enabled the world's population to expand to a point that now there is enormous pressure on the agriculture and food sector to be innovative and to expand production again. And some of you will have heard statistics that say that we're going to have to produce more food between now and 2050 than the world has produced in its entire human life. There are going to have to be at least 50% increases in world food production. So innovation has led to fantastic opportunities for the world community and a demand for new innovation. This is a real, and every other sector will have these sorts of challenges. So at a time when the world is talking a great deal about food security, where our big neighbours from the Middle East through to South Korea, quite a number of whom are heavily reliant on other countries and regions to produce their food supply, are getting very nervous about future food security. Here in Western Australia, we're actually dealing with serious industry viability issues. So there's enormous tension going on in our sector, and I'm sure in most other sectors, about how to deal with one particular challenge now when there is a different challenge facing us. And public servants have to play a role in that. So in tackling issues such as this, where there are no known pathways to solutions, you can't pick up an e-book, a Kindle, or an iPod and read the recipe. Public servants, whether they're involved in policy or economic analysis, or the development of clever services in consultation and engagement, or in partnership with other public servants right around Australia or perhaps around the world, need to be involved in an environment which really fosters innovation, totally different ways of thinking about things, developing new solutions for these challenges. And some of you have heard me talk before, will have heard me say that my favourite quotation from Einstein says that today's challenges will not be solved by the level of thinking that created them. And of course, what about tomorrow's challenges, where we're not even sure exactly what the challenge is? Clearly, what was published in books when we were at university, and even if you're a lot younger than me, is probably not going to provide the full solution. And it's through workshops such as this, through the linkages that people attending workshops such as this, and through the partnerships and collaboration that this workshop's all about, that will actually open our mind to quite different ways of looking at things, different ways of tackling things, that we will find solutions. Of course, the West Australian public sector does have a long history of attracting talented people who have developed innovative approaches that have been of great benefit to our community. But the innovation potential of the sector is far from realised. Other people will talk about constraints to innovation in the sector. But one of the big challenges and one of the big impediments to innovation in public sector organisations and public sectors generally is lack of clarity in leadership and in priorities. I must say that as a lifelong public servant, I have not observed a time when the clarity and support from government or the cohesiveness and collaboration at Director General and CEO level has been better than it is in the West Australian public sector now. That's a fantastic opportunity that public servants at all levels should not miss. It's a sort of making hay when the sun shines, although the sun didn't shine on any of the haymaking in Western Australia this year. But we do need to push forward when the environment is right. And I think the work that everyone is doing to foster innovation in the West Australian public sector right now is absolutely critical, and all power to everyone who's involved in it. It's clear that we must reduce the barriers to innovation. My personal view from all of my reading and observation is that the biggest barriers to innovation are in the minds of managers, and that if we empower our people to both work much more creatively within our organisation, to not accept the status quo in a rapidly changing world, and to look out the window and to partner and collaborate with others, perhaps particularly with those in sectors and organisations that they've never talked to before, who might just be actually trying to deal with the same sorts of issues as they are, then we will make great progress. My favourite word currently is co-creation, and I think you'll hear that used a few times from the social innovators today. In my career, I think we've gone on from an era of sort of paternalism in the public service, where the public got what we believed was good for them, and they loved it, of course. We've been through a long period of consultation and stakeholder engagement and all that sort of stuff, some of which is the stakeholders have said yes, they've been consulted, and sometimes we just ticked a box and said we'd consulted even though if we hadn't. But we are going into an environment now where actually working with the people, the communities, the businesses that we are looking to assist, and finding out, really listening to what they're trying to achieve and working out what the solutions to those challenges might be, and working that up together is the way that communities right around the world and public services right around the world seem to be getting the greatest success. And I'm sure there's a couple of people here today who will talk about that at some length. The West Australian Government has sought to create a much better environment through government reports, putting the public first, reducing the burden, cutting red tape and looking at quite creative ways of doing things. The current government in Western Australia has really sought to open up the approach that the government and its departments will take, and to encourage innovative approaches in the sort of business focused sector, in the general community service focused sector, and particularly in the social service part of our community, a particularly challenging area. So among the positive outcomes from previous work has been some excellent work our people have been doing to develop an innovation action plan for the sector, and that will be developed further and will be considered by Directors General and CEOs in the first half of 2012, and we will put it to the government. Not a grand glossy document, but a one which captures the sort of ideas and work that comes out of workshops such as this in a very practical approach to fostering innovation across the sector in its next phase. Among the other very positive work which has come out of the sector and these workshops has been the WA Public Sector Innovation Gateway, which is being launched today. Innovation Gateway provides an online forum for public sector employees to discuss innovation, their ideas and initiatives, and to share relevant knowledge and information. The forum is available on the Department of Commerce's Innovation Centre WA website, and I encourage you to use that tool. Ideas kept within your own head are probably not going to go very far. We do have the technology now, and I think we do have an approach in our community that just enables us to share ideas and share challenges and then work with others to join those two things up. For every problem there is an answer somewhere in the world. You've just got to find a way of linking them up. Other public sector innovation initiatives include a review of the state's intellectual property policy by the Department of Commerce, and that will be updated early in 2012. The development of Innovation Champions Network across the sector aims to build capacity and capability within and across agencies. Congratulations to IPA WA for the Innovation Awards that they've launched this year, and also the inclusion of innovation as a criteria for the prestigious WS Lonnie Awards for annual reporting. These are also expected to raise a profile and to encourage innovation in the public sector. So on behalf of Minister Terry Redmond and the West Australian Government, I commend all participating agencies for leading innovation across the sector, and for all public servants who have got on board with that. Without doubt, the greatest asset of any public sector is its people. the men and women who strive to deliver better outcomes for the community at large, and particularly, of course, for the particular part of the community for which they have some responsibility. I thank all speakers and participants here today for their willingness to collaborate and contribute to a better future, both here in Western Australia and by sharing our work with other sectors around Australia and New Zealand and elsewhere. I congratulate you for your innovation, your passion and your commitment, which will be integral to a brighter future, a sustained bright future for everyone here in Western Australia. With that, it's my pleasure on behalf of Minister Terry Redmond to declare the 2011 Innovation Workshop open and to introduce Diana Vidasovic, who's going to be our MC and facilitator today. Thank you very much.
I welcome and thank very much, Rob. It's going to take a lot of energy into the future, and that Challenges of Tomorrow is going to call for superheroes across high levels of government and industry, and I thank the industry people that are here today. So what we welcome him and give him is his own very superhero outfit, because like all of us, we're superheroes for the day. So may he be a superhero for the coming years to come. Thank you. Woohoo! Well, I'd like to introduce our very next speaker, Dr. Terry Cutler, and if he would join us at the podium and hear from him about the challenging innovation environment and the changing challenges for government and industry. Thank you very much.
I really wanted to talk about 3 points this morning. First of all, when we think about the environment for innovation, to remind ourselves that the fundamentals of innovation don't change. And it's always worth every now and again going back to those fundamentals and saying, are we making sure that they shape our practice and our focus when we get down to the nitty-gritty of thinking about innovating in particular areas or against particular challenges? Secondly, so in looking at some of those fundamentals, let's remind ourselves that we don't innovate as an end in itself for its own sake. Innovation is always a means to an end. We innovate for a purpose, and therefore we collaborate for a purpose. And the purposes of innovation are around actually driving competitiveness. It's about how we drive productivity and about how we deliver social dividends from innovation in the delivery of public service and the enhancement of our quality of life. Really important that we keep going back to those as core drivers and why innovation is just so important. The second fundamental is that innovation is a system, and it's an evolving system, and there are very different parts to it. One part is how we develop and nurture and grow our pool of knowledge and ideas from which we draw. And then it's the job of how we go about problem solving in sourcing possible solutions from that pool of knowledge and those ideas. And innovation only occurs when actually it's put to work, when good ideas, good applications are actually applied and taken up and used. Now, two things there. There are different challenges around collaboration in each of those different aspects of the innovation process. And secondly, I think it's really important that an innovation system is by definition comprised of the interplay and the interdependencies between a whole lot of different agents and different players. And I think what we don't pay enough attention to is clarity about the different roles in an innovation system, clarity about our own roles, because you cannot properly partner or collaborate or interact with others unless you have clarity about what your job is or what your role is and what you bring to partnerships and collaborations. I think that's a really neglected part of our conversation. The next fundamental, I'd like to highlight is that innovation revolves around information and information systems, and access to information and knowledge and information flows are at the absolute heart of any innovation system. It's the freedom to access that knowledge pool, prior art. As we keep saying, knowledge builds on knowledge. It's also then at the other end of the spectrum the ability to use that knowledge and information around freedoms to operate. And government plays a key role in promoting and developing effective information markets. And it's really good to see a lot of attention being paid to that at the moment around things like the whole movement around opening up and using government data with the whole data.gov movement. The focus on collaboration across jurisdictions around open technology platforms. One of the gigs I've got I'm really pleased with is chairing the Open Technology Foundation to promote open platforms because they provide the platforms on which we can have enhanced collaboration. Without that openness and interconnectivity, collaboration is more limited. And the third aspect, of course, around information markets where governments play an important role is in terms of developing greater open access to public sector information. And each of those three elements are now receiving much more attention both here in Australia and elsewhere. And that's really important when we think about collaboration because it's that provides the fuel, the feedstock for what we work on, and we need to be able to work off shared information bases, and we need to develop shared languages and shared tools around that information. And that, of course, is the hard bit. The hard bit about breaking down silos is actually learning how to talk across silos, talk across different tribal languages. The next point I want to make about the fundamentals of innovation relates to the fact that we've got a hierarchy of systems at play here that work from the role of individual activity within the innovation system right through to the global innovation ecosystem. And of course challenges at each level here as we move from project collaboration through to what's increasingly dominating the agenda, which is the challenges of large-scale innovation. And that's sort of saying, in a way, we've learned how to do the easy bits. The emerging challenges are about all the complex challenges, the wicked problems we're seeing more and more. Things like how do we actually rethink our cities and urban environments, the built environment with population growth, increasing congestion, and all the issues about cities. Ageing populations, climate change, resource depletion. These are mega challenges, wicked problems that are not easily solved by our current practice. And in solving them, no one agent or player can solve them by themselves. So it makes it crucial that we actually think about how we work across silos, across sectors, across disciplines, and across cultures. And that's no mean challenge. The final point I want to make here, or the second final point, is we don't often ask ourselves, go back to the question of what would success at the innovation game look like? What would a successful innovation system look like? And I think this is, and it was one of the really interesting questions that kept popping up during our review of the innovation system in 2008, that people never or seldom posed this question. So I've worked progressively on trying to pull together what people think are the core functions of an innovation system, but then more importantly, perhaps, trying to identify what are some of the constant potential points of failure in an innovation system and how we are alert to those and might address them. And it's very interesting because firstly, it's really important in working together that we have alignment of expectation and incentives around delivering the core functions, the core outcomes we want from innovation. And how might we think about the partnerships to deliver those core capabilities? But then how much of our focus around collaboration and partnerships is also about partnering and collaborating to actually address systemic failures in the innovation system? Really interesting test question. Now the final point I want to make before moving on to the changing environment is that, of course, innovation is fundamentally a people question. It's people who innovate and it's people who collaborate. And often when we talk about innovation, knowledge capital and so forth, we forget that actually there are many different forms of knowledge. We focus a great deal on things like intellectual property, intellectual capital. We focus far less on social capital and creative capital, associated with the more intangible aspects of knowledge, which are the know-who and the know-how. It's one thing to have knowledge, it's another thing to know how to apply that knowledge. And I don't think we've put nearly enough attention on this question of how we mobilise, nurture social capital as a key platform for developing our innovation capabilities. And social capital is all about social networks and then the information networks that they support. And I'll mention later, actually mapping social networks is actually a great way of, gives you a great diagnostic for the health of an innovation system and where there might be strong linkages, weak linkages, and those you might address. So I've briefly rehearsed what I see as some of the fundamentals of innovation that don't change. Now let me turn to the second point I want to make, which is that the innovation challenge is changing and becoming more complex and challenging. And one of the really interesting things being on the board of CSIRO, key player in the innovation system, has been when we periodically review our strategic plans for the organisation, how we think about that question of the changing environment for innovation and where we should be focusing our investment. And in producing our current strategic plan, we identified 5 global megatrends which we thought were really important in shaping our prioritisation and focus. And I think they're really very interesting in terms of saying how might they apply in different areas of our activities, various groups represented here today. Most of them are pretty obvious and of course they bundle a whole lot of other trends, but issues around resource depletion and the fact that we've got to innovate to actually get more from less input. The growth of the personalisation of services and the whole challenge of social and service innovation. Changing demographics with ageing populations, population growth, particularly in emerging economies, And what that means, as we've already heard, for things like food security and so forth. Growing urbanisation. I mean, now more than half the world's people live in cities. That's going to increase exponentially, and we're increasingly mobile. And finally, of course, the fact that we do now live in a digital society where virtually everything in the physical world has its own digital counterpart. Fundamental changes to the worlds we're operating in, and the way in which these sort of trends shape the innovation challenge. The other aspect of this, which we seldom look at, is the flip side of megatrends, which is mega shocks, and the importance in thinking about investing in innovation capability, in investing in the capability for resilience to deal with uncertainty, and how we collaborate under conditions of uncertainty. There are some other ways in which I think the innovation challenge is changing, and I think it's really important that we always have at the forefront of our mind the fact that this playing field will always keep changing, and therefore the challenge of innovation is a never finished business. But we see profound changes in the essential business of science and research. It's changing in front of our eyes. How we think about science, how we think about research is fundamentally changing as we move from, if you like, the clockwork universe of materials and physical science to the dominant mode now and focus of life sciences. So the mode of exploration changes and scientific method changes. We're moving into an incredibly data-intensive world as part of the digitalisation of everything we do. How do we deal with that data deluge that we're confronting? We also need to be incredibly alert to the fact that we are a shrinking part of the global innovation market, and often talk about the way in which we are a 2% innovation player globally in terms of market share, and that's shrinking as we see the emerging BRIC economies investing more and more in this area. So if we produce 2% of the world's new thinking, for example, how do we access the 98% that is being produced and developed elsewhere? And what does that mean for just how crucially important it is that we develop relationships, linkages and collaborations globally to tap into that, to be able to access and apply that knowledge and innovation locally. So the issue of global partnerships is, in my view, absolutely crucial for a country like Australia. Finally, I want to move to the question of, okay, so if there are certain fundamentals about innovation, and if we can see that the innovation game is changing in front of our eyes, what does this mean for collaboration and partnerships, the theme of this workshop? The bottom line proposition I want to make is that it actually makes collaboration far more important, but it is also becoming far more difficult. And I think we kid ourselves if we imagine that actually collaboration is easy. So what are some practical ways to mobilise our efforts around these innovation challenges collaboratively in this environment? And here I'll pick up some more examples taken from my CSIRO experience. I think the most significant breakthrough in CSIRO over the last decade has been the way it's reorganised itself around flagship programs. Programs focused on key outputs in areas of national importance. And the reason that we did that was in fact to try and break down the internal silos between areas of disciplinary science excellence, to actually mobilise across the organisation and focus effort around outputs in each of these areas, you know, whether it's preventative health, wealth promotions or whatever. So there's an important agenda around collaboration within organisations, across the silos within organisations, and of course the great challenge that's always with us of how we get whole of government perspectives and coordination. The real challenge here is how one coordinates, how one mobilises multi-party collaborations with a clear focus on outcomes. Who's the natural organiser of those collaborations? In the case of CSIRO, with its mission and charter, there are some obvious areas of focus for it. In a whole lot of areas of national challenge, there is no natural organiser of effort and collaboration to bring effort together. We've used, I think, cooperative research centres to some extent as one mechanism to try and provide an organisational coordination framework for coordinating effort. But there's much more to be done there, and of course as we tackle big challenges like climate change or food security, how we actually mobilise effort across multiple players becomes more and more of a challenge. The second challenge for Australia and for organisations like CSIRO is one of how we actually achieve scale of effort. I mean, we are a small country economy. Because of our geography, we tend to actually distribute and disperse our resources and capability not unnaturally around the coastline. Can we continue to afford to duplicate our efforts right around the country, and how do we actually take the available resources and leverage them more effectively? And so the second plank of our emerging national strategy in CSIRO is how we actually consolidate around what we're calling innovation hubs. So where we co-locate around particular areas of existing or emerging expertise, universities, CSIRO labs and industry, to build critical mass so we can actually make a difference. Now that's, you know, it sounds just really sensible and smart, and the idea is great, but how do you make that happen in practice? And that's still very much a work in progress. So how do you leverage those strategic synergies through collaboration to get scale and critical mass? Third angle goes back to my point about mobilising social networks and the information networks that build on social networks. And we did a couple of very interesting studies of CSIRO spin-outs, where we got some sociologists to actually map who was involved in the activity, from the research to the commercialisation to the taking to market, and who were the key players that made things happen. And it was a fascinating picture. And at the moment I'm trying to get more of this work done as a diagnostic to say, where do we have really good linkages that produce good outcomes, and where there are gaps where we need to nurture and in fact, you know, positively look at how we build social networks. Now, because that's sort of part of the soft infrastructure of innovation, it's something we don't pay nearly enough attention to, in my view, and that soft aspect of informal collaboration is something we don't pay nearly enough attention to. Now, and don't worry about this trying to even attempting to read this slide, but it's sort of current work in progress with a project I'm working on with the Inter-Americas Bank on just this issue of public-private partnerships and collaborations for economic development. And that's forced me to sit down and think quite carefully about what are the issues and how do you map those issues in this space. And in doing that, it seems to me there are 4 key dimensions in analysing and evaluating collaboration's actual or potential. The first absolutely crucial one is strategic intent. What are we trying to achieve? What's the driver here? Now, in some cases it's going to be the public sector trying to pull the private sector in to achieve national development objectives, or solve, or as the natural organiser of national problems. So the role of government around renewable energy and so forth is a really good example of that in emerging markets. In other cases, the strategic drivers are going to be the private sector saying to government, particularly around structural adjustment, we need to actually have a partnership to actually move forward. And of course, in a lot of areas of, say, of manufacturing, that issue of structural adjustment becomes an absolutely key driver. But the really important thing is that there's absolute clarity about what our strategic intent is. The second factor then in thinking about collaborative frameworks is one of saying, well, how do we determine the scope and scale of that collaboration? What are the system interdependencies that we need to take into account? What are the time frames? What are the life cycles of a collaboration and partnership? So you just don't, so you're thinking about exit, review, right from day one, for example. So number 1, strategic intent. Number 2, thinking about the scope and the scale, and making sure that the scale is commensurate with the strategic intent. The third is, then gets really hard. How do you structure the collaboration? And how do you develop structural vehicles for partnership and collaboration that are fit for purpose? And this is where we tend, particularly from the government side, to get it horribly wrong, because we're so risk averse and we try and shift all the risk to the other parties, so you end up with transactional documents that are hundreds of pages long, and indemnities and warranties before you can even sit down and talk together. So this is all about fit-for-purpose legal and contracting frameworks. And it reminds us that there are huge transaction costs potentially around collaboration and partnership. And we need to think about developing structures that are commensurate with the return on investment we seek from that partnership or relationship. And I think often we get that totally wrong. And a really good example also is of where, in getting it wrong, we produce all sorts of unintended consequences. And for a while the CRC program, the Cooperative Research Program, was heading down that track, because it went through a phase where it said every CRC had to be an incorporated vehicle. Now, the purpose of CRCs initially was to say, how do we improve the linkages, the information flows, and the diffusion from universities to industry and vice versa? And then you set up in the middle, with participating universities and industry, standalone corporate structures that develop a life of their own, and by definition impede the diffusion of knowledge and information. Beautiful example of unintended consequences. And that's something I always look at in particularly dealing with different governments and saying, when you're developing programs, always have the test question, two test questions. What are the unintended consequences that might emerge? And secondly, how might people rort the system? Two really good questions to ask. Now the final dimension to collaborative frameworks is around governance. And again, this is the one that both drives some of the structures, but we just seldom get right. Part of the problem is, particularly when you're dealing with large-scale innovation challenges, of identifying who's the natural leader of the action, the natural market organiser of the collaboration, the party that is best placed to mobilise the efforts of everyone. In a lot of cases, of course, that player doesn't exist. So how do you actually develop mechanisms by which you can have agents who bring together, mobilise as a governance solution? A really interesting challenge, and it's very interesting talking. It arises a great deal across levels of government, of course. It's very interesting in a lot of areas around our major challenges, like renewing our cities and transport issues, that talking to federal ministers, they'll say the challenge is actually one of governance, and the fact that we lack the governance frameworks to actually bring all the right parties together around the table and to be able to produce productive outcomes. So working out who is the natural leader is one issue under governance. Then who's accountable for what in a collaboration? So accountability and thinking about that as an issue. How do we manage the risks, particularly the risks of moral hazard to government when government's a party to a collaboration? And how do we develop the cultures and the trust that actually nurtures the underpinning social networks and social capital that is fundamental to successful outcomes? So, my key messages to you today are that it's always really important to go back to the fundamentals of what innovation is all about, and to make sure that our practice actually is consistent with what we know about the fundamentals of innovation. That we pay a lot of attention to how the landscape might be changing, so that we prioritise and focus our limited resources and effort around the things that really matter. And finally, recognise that collaboration is not costless, it's not easy, and to keep asking the question, what are the limits to collaboration? And it's not an alibi for not developing clear standalone roles within the innovation system. And you can have too much collaboration. And final point I want to make is the need to constantly ask the question, are we focusing too much on formal frameworks of collaboration rather than informal collaboration that we associate with the social networking of people and the social capital that emerges from those people linkages? Thank you very much.
May I ask to join us, Honourable David Bartlett?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here in Western Australia, and thank you, Terry, for your opening there, and Rob for some what I think are fantastic comments, and I hope to be able to weave into what I want to talk about today to you some of that content, I guess. I'll just make sure the technology is working, and yes it is. Can I start by saying it is, you know, you can take the boy out of politics, but can you take politics out of the boy? I don't know. It's great to be in Western Australia, the second largest geographically state in Australia, of course, because you'd all understand that where I come from, Tasmania, if you measure it from the northern tip of King Island to the southern tip of Macquarie Island, sub-Antarctic Tasmanian territory, it is in fact bigger than Western Australia, geographically speaking. So we've got that in common. We've also got the fact that the eastern states tend to leave us both off the map at regular occasions in common. So I always feel welcome when I'm in Western Australia, and it is great to be here. It's also great to be here actually for the first time as an ex-politician, as my 8-year-old son says regularly to me these days, Dad, when I grow up I want to be an ex-politician, because I think he can see that the brightness and lightness and joy in life return to his father, and this is a good thing. I want to congratulate the organisers too before I whip into what I want to talk about, particularly for the superhero theme, I've got to say. I've always considered myself a public policy professional, whether I was working in the bureaucracy in the Tasmanian government or in politics itself, a servant of the people, a public servant. And I've always believed passionately that throughout history it is the public sector that has made all the most important changes to our societies, communities. It is the public sector that continues to have to battle with the most difficult problems. If they are multiple, bottom line, complex, difficult problems, wicked challenges to solve, it is the public sector's job. If it makes money, that's the private sector's job. Therefore, I do believe that people who have committed themselves to a career or a part of their career in the service of the public, it is a superhero role, and therefore a appropriate theme I think we've got today. Look, I've been invited here essentially, I think, to talk to you, I guess, of tales from an NBN frontier, to weave in, I guess, importantly, collaborative partnerships and what it means to have ubiquitous, high-speed broadband and other digital technologies underpinning our communities in social and economic renewal, and how public policy makers, community builders, of which there are many in the room, need to respond to both the NBN rollout, but I don't want to confine my comments to NBN as a specific, but more to ubiquitous high-speed broadband telecommunications and what that means for our communities, particularly, as I'm particularly passionate about, regional economies, regional communities, in the sense of economic and social renewal. So I want to start by saying, quoting from a recent Deloitte Access Economics report, which I actually use this slide all over Australia, but of course as I get to Western Australia I find that it's particularly relevant, and that is that Access Economics, in a report commissioned by Google, admittedly, found that in fact that as a direct contribution to the internet as a direct contribution to the Australian economy is equivalent to the direct contribution of iron ore exports, which I think in Australians' language they can understand that, because everybody in the nation understands how important to our underpinning our economy and our terms of trade are iron ore exports. But it's much harder to wrestle with an ephemeral idea of the internet and what its contribution to our economy is. What, though, that more importantly, I think, than that, the Deloitte Access Economics report goes on to say, is that in fact the internet's contribution to our economy will grow by some 20 to 40% over the next decade. Well, it's anyone's guess in terms of what the growth of iron ore's contribution to our economy might be, given world events, Chinese economy and a whole range of other things. What, I guess, if there's one message I want to deliver to communities all over Australia, having been a Premier that and a Minister for Innovation, Science and Technology, and a public servant and a public policy maker for really the best part of a decade in trying to take Tasmania from a telecommunications backwater to one that telecommunications would underpin innovation, underpin collaboration, underpin economic and social renewal. The one thing I want to particularly leave you with, a thought, I suppose, is that this stuff, that is ubiquitous high-speed broadband and the associated digital technologies, are not just about faster downloads, are not just about, as I've heard some political commentators and other commentators say, downloading movies from iTunes quicker. In fact, these technologies will and already are doing I want to make three arguments. Firstly, they are creating extraordinary new ways of creating wealth, particularly in regional communities, potentially. They are creating extraordinary new ways of communicating with our constituencies. If I was talking to a business audience, I might call them clients or customers. In a public sector sense, I might talk about constituents or the people that we are as public servants here to serve. And thirdly, they are creating extraordinary new ways of solving old and fundamental public policy questions and challenges. And I want to give you three anecdotes that hopefully convince you of those assertions. Firstly, you can see up on the screen here there's a picture of, and I want to see hands in the air, has anyone ever heard of the massively online multi-parallel role-playing game EverQuest? Okay, this is good. Mostly, this is very clearly a very considered and well-informed audience, because most audiences you get no one. But then you say, well, have you got a spotty 13-year-old son? He probably knows EverQuest. Or he knows Minecraft or World of Warcraft or whatever the current. And in fact, EverQuest is a little bit, as my son would say 5 minutes ago, Dad, and he's into something else. But EverQuest, as you can see from the screenshot, in fact, is an online game that at its height had 14 million players worldwide. But the really interesting thing about EverQuest, and this is a story that's actually 8 to 10 years old, was a guy called Ed Castronova wrote a PhD specifically about EverQuest. And the reason he did was because he found that of the 14 million people that were playing this worldwide, there were actually 14 people who had become millionaires playing this game, and some 14, between a couple of thousand and 10,000 at any given point in time over that period of its rise and fall as a popular game, were making a living out of playing EverQuest online. And the question that has to be asked is, how do you become a millionaire playing an online role-playing game with swords and castles and dragons and what have you, as you can see? How do you become a millionaire when there are no visible means of actually creating wealth or making money out of playing this game? How do you do that? Well, in fact, some very bright people worked out that these assets, these online virtual assets of castles and swords and weapons and vast tracts of land that don't actually exist, of course, other than as digital signals or ones and noughts stored in a server somewhere in Tennessee, no doubt, that don't actually exist in the physical world, you can build them in the online world and take them to eBay and sell them for real American dollars to time-poor people who want to play this game but don't have the time to build the assets to get into it. Now, people discovered that this was actually so prevalent that as this grew so rapidly, people were setting essentially what I would call sweatshops, paying university students $5 an hour to play EverQuest on their behalf and collect those assets and then take them to eBay to sell them. And in fact, this became so prevalent, this activity, that there were whole websites set up dedicated to the exchange rate between the US dollar and the EverQuest gold coin, a currency that doesn't actually exist, of course, online. And in fact, at one point, this was happening so much that EverQuest, a country or a place in a virtual space that doesn't actually exist, was in fact the 86th richest country on earth, with a per capita gross domestic per capita product are better than Russia's and better than many other countries around the world. Now that is an extraordinary new way of creating wealth. I'm not advocating necessarily that Australia should have an online games-led recovery or underpin our economy in this way, but what I'm doing is making the argument that there are extraordinary new ways of creating wealth out of ubiquitous high-speed broadband that most of us in the room hadn't even thought of before. Secondly, there are disruptive new channels through which to have a conversation with your customers. And my perhaps trite example here, but I think extraordinary one as well, is that leading up to the September school holidays, I decided to run a bit of a test, and I, within Facebook, my own Facebook account, emailed my wife's Facebook account saying, would you like to go to Fiji for our September school holidays? To which she wrote back, yes, I'd love to go to Fiji just a little footnote here, I ended up buying a new blue ute rather than taking the family to Fiji, and that is still the cause of some consternation in our household. But with it, the point of the story is, as I keep telling Larissa, that within 10 minutes of the exchange of those emails within Facebook, the advertisements on my Facebook page had changed to online travel bureaus for Fiji tourism. Now that is a disruptive new channel through which to have a conversation with your customers. What I ask governments that I work with, and we at Explore work with around Australia, is how are you using these extraordinary new channels to have conversations with your customers, constituents, what have you? How are you using these extraordinary new channels, for example, to engage a 16-year-old lad who is disconnected from school and is no longer engaged in education, but we as good public policy people want to see more engagement in education? And that is a question we need public policy people need to resolve. But more importantly, I think these technologies, ubiquitous broadband, digital technologies, offer incredible new solutions to old public policy challenges. And again, my anecdote here might sound trite, but it is, I think, an extraordinary one. That is, as Premier, of course, I was Premier at the time that the H1N1 swine flu swept through, and no doubt people who are from the Department of Health here or engaged in public health in policy in some way would remember it. You know, we all raced around setting up clinics. We had some 37 of them. I dread to think how many were in Western Australia. We didn't have one on Macquarie Island. Across Tasmania. And I was saying to the public health officials at the time, tell me, how is this going to spread? Now, as it turned out, H1N1 was a fairly innocuous strain, but as we've seen, and I really like, Terry, the slide about the 5 global shocks and so on, the next one may not be. As it turns out, the public health officials could not tell me as Premier how this was going to spread. They had absolutely no idea. But as it turns out, post the event, the very best predictor of the spread of swine flu out of Mexico City and throughout the rest of the entire planet, right down to very specific geographical areas, suburb level if you like, it turns out was Google searches. That is, I've heard about this swine flu, I've got a bit of a cough, I go to my computer, I type in swine flu into Google. If you track that, it turns out to be the very best predictor of the spread of that pandemic across the planet. Now that is an extraordinary piece of information, I think, for public policy makers in public health. And I guess the theme of that is that, and the theme that I particularly like, the co-creation word that we heard from both Rob and Terry today. The theme of that is that governments, I actually like the term that Beth Simone-Novick, who was Obama's advisor on open government, coined in this area, which is wiki-government, or the co-creation of policy, or using the crowd to actually source the information we as public policy makers need to solve the problems that we currently face, and will continue to face. Is the underpinning of these sorts of ubiquitous technologies, or these technologies when they are a bit ubiquitous. Now, post-politics, I'm involved in a whole range of things, and one of them is as director with a firm called Explore, the blurb goes, we help communities and their governments to essentially, and industry sectors, to imagine better futures underpinned by ubiquitous broadband and digital technologies, and then we help them build strategies to get there. Now, I'm passionate about this because in Tasmania, the NBN started rolling out 2 years ago after I lobbied hard, paid our $5 million of taxpayers' money to the NBN selection panel, put in our assets that we'd built over 10 years, essentially, and won the first NBN rollouts. And I'm not here to say we got everything right. I'm actually here to say I got a lot of things wrong, and from that learning I am passionate about sharing that understanding with other regional communities around Australia and public policy makers so that we can learn about how those opportunities might be best exploited for our regional communities. And the argument we make and the work we're doing in communities around Australia is based on three essential elements. Often we think that, often communities, and many communities that I'm working in, are deeply focused on the infrastructure, the colour of the cables, the wires, the poles and wires, the bits and pieces, the Wi-Fi, whether it's fibre or whether it's copper, and all of those sort of debates. This is an important and fundamental necessary precondition for the exploitation of ubiquitous broadband, obviously. It's necessary to have the infrastructure. But my argument is that actually there are two other necessary preconditions for communities, for public policy makers to understand to make this exploitation or this underpin community renewal with these technologies. It is not good enough to say if you build it they will come. It will not happen in that way, and that was one of the fundamental mistakes that I think I made as Premier, in fact, with those early rollout towns, expecting people on the ground to understand and therefore create opportunity. That didn't happen. The two other necessary preconditions then that we talk about as fundamentally important are the narrative. Others might use the term vision, goal setting, storytelling. It's a whole range of things. I like the term narrative, I always have. It is about 1,000 voices in communities from the ground up, talking about the successes, the opportunities, and sharing the knowledge. It's all very well and good for a Premier to be saying this new stuff is fantastic and it's going to change West Australian life or Tasmanian life, or for Senator Conroy out of Canberra to be saying this is really important, we're rolling this out because. But unless we as communities, you as public policy makers working in those communities, are able to create 100 voices, 1,000 voices, 1,000 stories at a local level that people can relate to, that provide that narrative, you will not get the take-up or understanding. The most powerful stories I've seen in this area are when the farmer in Smithton, who makes the best Cape Grim beef, marbled steaks, and sells them into Tokyo restaurants and Tokyo supermarkets, was able to use some of this high bandwidth technology to show a customer in Tokyo that where this, I'm not sure I'd like to see this personally, but where this steak had come from, how it had been grown, what the cow had been fed, what weather conditions, here's the paddock it grew up in an online way. And all of a sudden he could sell those steaks for twice the price. That's narrative, and that means every other farmer in the district goes, there's something in this. One of the great challenges in this is that the narrative is often taken over by boffins like me, or by IT experts, and which is great because they are great champions of these sorts of things. But what it actually has the impact of in communities is everybody else shutting their ears and saying, that's not about me, I'm in tourism, or that's not about me, I'm in primary industries, or that's not about me, I run the salvos in this community, that's nothing to do with me. And that is completely false. The narrative is vital. The third and we think most important element that builds on that is, of course, a digital strategy. Now, later on, and I'll point out my fellow director and partner in Explore down the back here, and he's holding up a blue thing. That's Peter Croger. And the blue thing is essentially our tool that we have developed out of both our learning in Tasmania and our working with communities around Australia. And one of the most important things is to understand, Peter's putting some up the back if you want to take one on the way out, you're most welcome to, that to get communities to understand that getting this technology as it arrives is not just about, oh, we could attract a Google call centre or a data centre, or, you know, or we're going to have a great IT industry now because we've got this technology. It's in fact about, we argue, 12 essential components of community life, and this tool is a maturity tool, effectively, or a maturity model that allows whole communities across those dozen areas to assess where they're at. Are they doing a good job in health and well-being, for example, or renewing their health and well-being policy and activity underpinned by the new broadband and digital technologies activities? It allows them to self-assess and then allows them to go on, hopefully, and build strategies that get them to where they want to go. So in the remaining time, and I think I'm over time in fact, but in the remaining time, I'm going to go really rapidly through these 12 areas and what they are. And the reason why I want to do that is because what we find when we get to communities who are seeing NBN roll out or trying to understand build a better future for themselves, mostly they focus, when they're talking about broadband and digital technologies, only on the economic side and often only in the IT sector. What we would argue is there are actually 12 key focus areas for a better future underpinned by these technologies, and they are ensuring households are connected. The slides actually I'm using here are from a workshop we run with communities, which is a much more in-depth assessment and gap analysis and priority setting with those communities for how they do it. Having local information available online and being able to use that and share it and so on in a local way. Underpinning vibrant and sustainable living in communities. Ensuring that the community's health and well-being, and I'll just pause on this bit for a moment, we know as public policy makers, with demand for health services growing at something like 18%, and governments, if they're lucky, being able to provide the supply side growth at 4 to 5%, that something must fill the gap in our communities. And as public policy makers, I think this is one of the biggest challenges we have for the next 2 decades in Australia. My view is that a portion of that gap can be met by using the wisdom of the crowd and engaging people in their own health management in an online community sense. Those are the sorts of projects we talk about in communities. Same with community education and skills, safety and security, and this is particularly relevant today on a terrible day in Western Australia where many people have faced the loss of their home, and some others probably are still facing that prospect in areas of bushfire. One of the sites that we talk about is Ushahidi. Now that came out of Haiti and came out of violence in post-election Kenya and those sorts of places. It's a platform though for essentially crowdsourcing information from Twitter feeds, from Facebook feeds, from mobile phones, from so on, that will allow public safety operators in any given jurisdiction to deliver better outcomes in terms of safety and deliver the aid and the firefighting equipment where it's needed. Engagement of the socially excluded, democracy and open government, and Terry talked a bit about that movement earlier today. Online government services, of course, key economic sectors and the overlay of these technologies with the either key economic sectors that are in decline or in ascent is vital. The SME sector, particularly the retailers on the high street that are terrified of this stuff. And then the ICT sector and digital workforce, which we essentially put last, and I don't need to say anything more about that particular slide. With that, and the time I've got available, I thank you very much for the invitation.
Welcome to the podium, David Shee.
Good morning, everybody. Good, thanks. The topic of my presentation is Kaggle competition for motorway travel time prediction. And the thing I'm going to talk about is, I think, crowdsourcing exercise recently undertaken by New South Wales government in engaging a company called Kego to try to find a solution to a public transport problem, which is travel time prediction on Sydney's motorways. And I think it's a concrete example of what David and Terry talked about. And this exercise basically has provided a solution with much more efficiency and saving a lot of money to taxpayers' money compared to the way if we do it in the conventional way. And what I'm going to talk about is, first I'll just briefly talk about what is Kego, and then I'll go through the process, how this Kego competition for Sydney's import travel time prediction was rolled out, and then I'll talk about a little bit about results, and I'll finish by the benefits and lessons learned. And so what is Kego? I don't know how much of you have heard about Kego, but Kego is an open competition platform, a web-based, internet-based open competition platform for solutions to data mining problems. So basically what they're trying to sell is that if any big organization can provide them with a certain amount of data, they are able to build a model out of that data and give you a prediction into the future how that data will be like. It's a little bit like weather forecasting. And Kego is an Australian startup started in Melbourne in early 2010, and now it's quite becoming more and more famous, and it has moved to San Francisco in the US. And just last week I read from newspaper that Kego has recently attracted $11 million from some famous venture capital investors, and it's counting. And their basic business model is that Kego helps competition host. In our case, is New South Wales Department of Transport. They help competition hosts to prepare the data and a description of the problem, and then Kego will design a competition and put it onto a web-based platform, and then across the world there will be participants submit their solution using the data provided to them to solve the problem framed by and formulated by Kego and the competition host. And after the deadline of submission, a winning entry will be selected, and the competition host will pay prize money so far ranging from $5,000 to $3 million per solution to acquire the winning model. And Kego earns a fee from the competition host. In our case, we probably didn't pay them the fee because Kego was in the process to publicize themselves, to build their profile. And my understanding now is that Kego now is having a much more flexible and versatile business model now. And just a bit background of what we are trying to do in this exercise. In Sydney, we have on some of our motorways, we display some overhead and variable sign and message signs and travel time between where the signs are to downstream destinations. For example, in this case, this is a sign on the motorway M7. This shows to driving public that travel time from where they see the sign to M4 motorway is about 12 minutes, to M2 motorway is about 24 minutes. So this is what we are doing now, but Department of Transport would like to have a predictive travel time on our travel information website so that people, before they take a journey, they could go to this website, check how much travel time it's going to take for them to arrive at a certain destination. So for that purpose, we need to build we call it a predictive travel time model. And that's for us to do, it will be very difficult. That is when the Department of Transport engaged the Kego to do this for us. And this basically tries to describe the whole process. I think it's a bit difficult to read from far, but basically I think the first part of it is that Kego approached New South Wales Department of Transport, and together we built, we discussed how we will pass the historic travel time data on our motorways to Kaggle, and how Kaggle would then design a competition and to offer this as a competition to the whole world, and to get the wisdom, hopefully find a solution from the wisdom crowd. And then we start go into a formal competition phase where we, as technical people, we provide online support to participants from the whole world. And then early this, that was the whole thing started from November last year, and the competition ran from November last year to February this year, so it's about 3 or 4 months. And in this year and February, March time frame, a winning entry was selected, and then the solution was provided back to us. And then during this year, in the transport management center where I work, we received this solution and we did an evaluation of how it works, and it turned out to be quite good results. And that was described by this bottom line process. And so a little bit more about how this competition was organized. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the actual web page created by Kaggle. As I said, Kaggle is basically a web-based platform. They only had 3 or 5 people in the whole company, and this page basically says that this is the place where people across the world, academics or freelance researchers, they came across the register and they receive data, and then they will submit their solutions using all different sorts of computing resources. And on this slide, what you can see is that the prize money we offered was $10,000. And at that time, there were in total 356 teams participating in this competition. And obviously, this 9 months is because I downloaded this page a few days ago, and this basically says that the competition closed 9 months ago. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see that when the competition closed, there had been over 400 players submitting in a total number of over 3,300 entries. And there's also on the screen, it shows that on the web page there's they call it the leaderboard, which is a very innovative thing in that people who Kaggle has got a way to calculate for after each submission of entry from public, a way of saying this is how good it is. And so the team which achieved the best results, temporary results, interim results, will be placed at the head of the leaderboard. This basically encourages all the other guys, all the other teams to continuously innovating to try to beat the top guy. And so a little bit about the technicality of this exercise. The two type graphs on the screen basically show that the predictive solution provided by Kaggle, how good it is. On this screen, I don't know if you can see there are 2 curves. One is blue, another is red. The blue curve is what the travel time actually was on one of Sydney's motorway on a particular day in May. And the red curve is actually the prediction provided by the Kaggle solution 30 minutes ahead of time. So as you can see, the difference between 2 curves, especially for the morning peak and for the afternoon peak on that particular section of motorway, difference is very small, which basically means that, for example, now, if I use their solution now for that particular Sydney motorway, I predict what travel time is going to be from A to B on the motorway 30 minutes from now on. The difference will be very small. On the other hand, the solution does also show a limitation that this particular blue curve shows that on that particular day, there was in the evening a very bad accident happened. Obviously, this is very difficult to be captured using your historic data. So that's why you could see the red curve has got a lot of difference from the actual curve. But in technical terms, this doesn't matter that much, because whenever there's a major accident happens, transport management will take over to tell public that there's an accident happening there, so there's no need to publish travel time in a way. And on the right-hand side, you will see that on some days, the solution may not work very well, and that is something we are continuing to work on. So come back to the, after this evaluation of the solution provided by Kaggle, the main outcome is that obviously the New South Wales government was pretty happy about the outcome because they are likely to use the same approach to try to resolve some other more higher profile problems. In this particular case, if we are to develop and find a solution in a traditional way, it would probably take us, we'll have to spend probably at least 10 times the money and maybe 3 or 5 times of time to get to that. So the benefit, in my view, from that time efficiency point of view is quite obvious. And technically speaking, the evaluation work we did on the Kaggle winning solution was that generally it has provided a very satisfactory prediction performance. However, the solution is not yet suitable for implementation. This is also related to one of the lessons we have learned from this exercise is that when you do outsourcing, usually you do not have predictable outcomes in terms of how practical you are going to use the solution. And that is something we are actually currently working on. It's promising, but we are working on that one. In terms of actual benefits, I'll just come back to this one, is that we found that this crowdsourcing exercise has been a very cost-effective research and development effort for us. And also, Kaggle competition does have elements that encourage innovation, as I earlier pointed out. And also, by the nature of the competition, it actually automatically selected the best performing approach, because across the world, all this, public free available research and computing resourcing has been used. People using totally different approach to solve the same problem. So naturally, there's a natural selection of the best approach. So we don't have to engage, for example, universities in Sydney to try to find a particular approach. While this process actually naturally has got so many different approaches coming up, and it's actually selected the best one. As I said, it has the ability to mobilize often extraordinary computing resources. In fact, the winning solution was provided by a couple of guys from a country called Costa Rica, and who went to the US, who actually live in the US, who used the immense amount of computing resources to come up with a actually workable solution for us. So we don't have to spend money to use this extraordinary computing resources to reach the solution. And also results show significantly promise from our point of view. And also nicely, because we acquired the solution, we do not have, there's no sort of like intellectual property issue. We own the solution. So that's another major win for us. And just lastly, some lessons learned. I think we found that we should have been more actively involved in the co-design of the competition. As the former distinguished speaker mentioned, the co-creation, I think we should also be more actively involved in the co-creation of this story, instead of just sitting back waiting for the solution to come. And also, we should have been more actively involved during the competition, how to guide the competition interests so that they can lead to a more practical solution in terms of implementation issues. And thirdly and lastly is that if we are to redo this again, we would have put forward a set of requirements as to how the final solution should look like, so that it will increase the possibility of its usability to us. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for it.
Thank you for having me here today, everyone. I'm going to do my very best to pull this topic, this huge topic, into 20 minutes, which I've never had to do before, so bear with me. And if you've got any questions, I'll be hanging around during lunch today anyway. Like was said, my name's Carolyn Curtis, and I'm the director of a project called Family by Family that was born out of the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. For those of you who haven't heard of us before, we're based in South Australia, but we're actually a national organisation. So we travel all over the place talking about our projects, and are now starting to work on some projects in other states as well. So I guess what I'm going to bring to life for you today is this, this word that's been thrown around called co-creation. And Family by Family is really sort of co-creation at its finest. It's really going to give you a great example about what it is to design something and to create something new with the person that's going to use it. So my thingy's not working. So my background's in child protection, and I spent 10 years working in a range of different roles, from an investigator through to a senior manager. And when I left the Child Protection Agency to move to taxi, I was given a brief. And the brief was, how could we enable more South Australian families to grow and thrive, and fewer families to spiral towards state intervention. So just like South Australia, every state in Australia has some huge challenges with child protection. We have child protection systems that are imploding, and the workload is far too great for any state to be able to manage. So this was the problem that I was given. And I was put into a team, and there was a team of 3 of us, and it was quite a unique team and multidisciplinary on a whole different level. There was myself, who came from a social work background and later management, and then I worked with a girl by the name of Sarah, and Sarah is a sociologist who came over from Texas. And then I worked with a guy called Chris, and Chris Vanstone, he's from Wales, and he's actually a designer, and his career started with making chairs and making razors, and then later down the track he got into the business of designing services and designing interactions and designing what happens between 2 people or between people and services. So no, still not working. So the 3 of us worked on used a methodology called radical redesign, and this is what Taxi is now designing a curriculum in this concept. And it's a 12-month process, and this process started off by us looking at the problem. So how do we stop so many families from entering the child protection system? Those words mean very little to families. If you utter the word child protection or child abuse in too many families' homes, you don't often get a very positive response or a very engaging response. So we spent 3 months out in the southern area of Adelaide, spending up to 3 days at a time in families' homes, and we used more of an anthropological ethnographic approach to really immerse ourselves in their lives, to really understand family life, homes, families on a whole new level. And this went on for 3 months, and we wanted to really understand what was the problem in their eyes, and more importantly, where was the opportunity. So for them, the word was stress. The word that worked really well for them was stress. You know, what stresses us out? What are the stresses? And so we ended up talking a lot about family stress, and how do we help families deal with stress and get more good stuff in their lives. Those were the sorts of words that really resonated with families. After we came up with a new problem that worked for families and started to get an idea about some of the opportunities that existed within families, we put a whole stack of ideas on some paper. We drew pictures, we had examples, we had some videos, and we took them out to families. And we would put these ideas or storyboards or concepts in front of families, and they would very quickly tell you, oh, no, I don't like that, or yeah, I might go to that, but I'd go to that if you did this, this and this, or I'd go to that if you helped me get there, or if it was a bit cheaper, and before you knew it, they were finishing off the design. They were finishing your very, very early idea and turning it into something that they'd actually rock up to, that they'd turn up to and that they would buy into. And so after we came up with a pretty solid idea, and the idea was about taking 2 families and putting these families together, we thought, well, we're going to prototype this idea. Now, prototyping is a design concept. The word that I was more familiar with, and some of you here might be familiar with, is piloting. But rather than putting a whole stack of money into a 6, 12, 2-year pilot, we thought, let's have 12 weeks. let's take 12 weeks and rapidly test this out with real people in real time and see if we can, you know, come up with something that really works, and more importantly, that really works for families. So we prototyped this idea and ended up with something that was pretty amazing, and that was family by family. And after we came up with a fairly polished idea, we needed to create some systems and structures that fit around that idea, that was going to enable that idea to happen. So that's when we look at prototyping metrics and prototyping systems. And then lastly, it was around developing a business case. So we've got this great idea, we think it's good, the families think it's good, but what's going to make this idea any better than the other 5,000 ideas out there? And how are we going to get funding to make this idea stick, or at least the funding to further explore and develop this idea? And that was the piece of work that we finished off at the beginning of this year. And now we have family by family. So what is it? Family by family. We find two groups of families. We're looking for families that have been through some really hard times and come out the other side and doing quite well now. And we link them up with families that are still sitting smack bang in the middle of hard times. For them, it's about putting one foot in front of the other. It's about coping. It's not about thriving. They're really just surviving. So we link these two families together and we're looking at behaviour change. So we're not interested in just the relationship that's created, we're interested in the outcomes that occur because of that relationship. What changes for those families because they've met each other? And that's what we're interested in measuring. So how do we meet these families? We have all sorts of weird and wonderful events and pop-up stalls, and our events are very developmentally based. They're intentional, they're designed. So, you know, even if it's making a mask, for example, like you all are today, we would provide a space whereby a whole family could sit round a table and create and make something together. It's not about kids making and parents standing back watching and observing. We're all about getting everyone in there creating and making together. Now the families that we recruit, that are the families that have come out the other side and doing quite well now, we call these families sharing families. And these families come away on a camp with us for 3 days, and we provide them with some training. And this training isn't about turning them into mini social workers or counsellors. It's about valuing and acknowledging that natural skill set that they already have. They function well as a family. Their relationships are great. They are brokered to each other, but also brokered to opportunities in the community outside their household. They may not be employed. They might have a huge history that includes things like mental health or disability or work cover. Yet for some reason their family works and their family dynamic works well. And we think that that's a huge, huge skill set that they could teach and pass on to others. But the interesting thing is that this has not been brought to light for them before. So when you first raise this with them, a lot of them say things like, well, why would you want me? What could I possibly do? Or how could I possibly help another family? I don't even have a job. And the answer to that is, well, you're part of a family. And not only are you part of a family, but you're part of a great family. And that in itself is something huge that you could pass on to someone else or another family. So when the sharing families come back from camp, we link them up. So we link them up and we have two different pathways for our referrals. We meet some of the families who are struggling through our events, but some of our referrals come through more of a direct sort of service referral pathway. And we link these families up, and they link up from anywhere to 10 weeks to 30 weeks, depending on how big their story is and how much that they'd like to change in their lives. And these link ups are happening for us now, and it's really interesting, and I'll show you in a couple of minutes some footage of some of the families and things they've got to say about this. So how do we keep the focus on change and impact and outcomes versus just creating another peer support program or another mentoring program or another nice friendship group? Because this could very easily become that. And so we have designed a range of different tools that we use with families. and this one we refer to as the bubble diagram. And when families first link up together, they need to identify what are those things about their life and their family's life that they want to change. What do they want to be different? Even if they don't feel like it's possible, what is it? Where do they want to get to? And what do they want their family to look like? And then at several points through the link up, we go back and we look at that diagram and we measure the changes in their behaviour. They self-report, and we also have staff observations and focus groups. And so it's this bubble diagram that enables families to really keep the focus on change and ensure that their relationship is more than just a friendship. The professional role in Family by Family is that of the coach. So I guess in traditional language, this would have been the role of like a social worker. But the coach catches up with the sharing family every week. And the coach is there to troubleshoot, to inspire, to motivate, to problem solve. Most importantly though, is to really keep the focus on change and change for families. And the coach also catches up at several points during the link up with the seeking family, both families, so they can do the measurement with the families. After 15 goes at measurement, and you know, don't get me wrong, measurement is probably one of the hardest things to master, particularly when you're looking at things like changing behaviour. So after trying 15 different versions with families in terms of measuring how their behaviour and their family's behaviour changes, we came up with stickers. And stickers works really well because not only are adults partial to the odd sticker or two, but the kids love stickers. So it was a great way to engage the whole family in really sitting down and having a conversation as to whether their link up was making things worse, whether it was, you know, not really changing anything, whether it was changing things a little bit, or whether it was changing things heaps. And so we use stickers at 3 points in the link up to measure how things are changing. And that's important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because we need that data. We need it for our business planning, we need it for evaluation, we need it for funding. But of equal importance, it's a great feedback tool. It's an excellent tool to help families see whether or not anything's shifting for them, or whether they're just sort of still sitting in the same place. So next I'm just going to show you a short clip of a video which is really based around the making of Family by Family. So on this video you'll see a few interviews with some of our key partners. Some of them might be familiar to some of you. And you'll also see some interviews with families about what it felt like to be part of this co-creation, co-design process, and how it's been different from every other experience they've ever had before.
No, not at all.
Far from it.
Okay.
No, we would not volunteer for anything.
Ever.
Normally? Not at all.
No,
So
we just don't get involved in things. We really don't. For some reason we just choose not to get involved in a lot of different community type activities, because a lot of the time they're really, I don't know, they almost seem political, where it's about, you know, who runs it and you have to answer to this one and you have to do that and you're not allowed to say this, and they don't actually want any input. Like if you go and get involved and you go, oh, I reckon that could be done better, they don't care what you think, they just want you to do what you're told. But with this it was all about what we thought.
This started where families were at. It didn't actually go in with a predetermined solution and an established program saying, you know, family, you have a particular problem, it needs to be fixed, and here we are as a professional with a solution for you. If we apply this solution, your problem will be fixed.
If policy is going to work, if it's going to be about enabling people to live different lives, then we've got to figure out what people actually need and want and prototype that stuff first before we put in place all of the structures and systems. In In the look phase, we're trying to answer the question, what would be a great outcome for people? And to do that, we have to hang out with people, and that's what are known as ethnographic methods. That's trying to figure out what makes people tick, what motivates them, what excites them, what gets them up in the morning.
You're just being with that family and living a day as they live it, experiencing a day as they do, and understanding what the ups and downs look like.
Part of the learning for me, was to learn what an ethnography was and how I would apply that. It's quite a scary process really, because that involved having to actually walk the client's journey, and this was a bit of a displacement of power, I guess. One of the most important things that I've learnt from this project is the element of prototyping, and if I can explain it in my own words, I understand it as something where you can try and you test something with the people that you're working with, and you get to test it over again until something works.
There's paper prototyping, where you might create a storyboard and put that in front of somebody and ask them to imagine themselves in that situation. And then there's experienced prototyping, and experienced prototyping is where you really learn the most, because you try out something like a mini version of something or a live version of something over a period of time. So in Family by Family, we hired new staff, we recruited families, we connected them up in link-ups, and those link-ups ran for around 12 weeks. And from that real live experience, we were able to see what worked and keep changing things.
On a Wednesday night dinner, for instance, they'd come and say, look, we've thought of all these things, what do you guys reckon? And we'd all say, no, we don't agree with this, or this one's really great, or maybe change this one a bit. And then next week they come back and go, see, this is what we did. And it was like, hey, they actually listened. Like, we said that wasn't a great idea, and they actually paid attention. And that was a pretty big deal. There were a few nights we went home and went, oh my God, that was our idea.
It's probably one of the few, if not the only programs I've ever seen that's actually allowed that sort of developmental process to go through, over many months. And so somebody sitting a little bit on the outside watching this occur, it was fascinating. But on the other hand, it could be a bit frustrating, because you kept on thinking, gosh, that was a pretty good methodology or set of materials or resources you put together to work with these families. Gosh, I'd just be running with that. And then suddenly you gave time for families to sort of pick the eyes out of it and say, yeah, parts of that really worked and other parts were crap.
In the value phase, we're trying to answer the question, what would it take for our prototype solution to actually grow and affect more people? And so that means telling the business case story of it. So that's what kind of social impact are we creating? What kind of cost savings emerge from working in this way in the long term? And the second is the emotional story. So using film and more ethnographic kinds of techniques to really let people know what was the experience like of being part of this solution, and why does it need to exist?
Being part of the prototype, it's been awesome, because I feel like we've had a say in how things are going to end up being, when it goes through. And I think that's just amazing, because who else is better to help with all of that kind of stuff. There's been a few little hiccups and stuff.
It has challenged me personally and professionally in every way a person could be challenged. It's right from the start. I'm assessment versus ethnography, and writing a policy versus co-design, and prototyping versus piloting, throwing things out as quickly as you make them. It's just really starting from the bottom up, and I really understand now, and I think it's taken me the full 12 months, but I do really understand the potential that exists when you design and you create something with your end user versus creating something for them that you think will fit them best.
Whilst it can be frustrating at one level to sort of have to sit back and wait for something to develop over time like this, it makes eminent sense that that's exactly what we should be doing in social policy construction, that we shouldn't be jumping to solutions that are half-baked and often don't have any evidence to sort of back them up, and we should actually give ourselves the time and space, not just to actually develop the right programs, but to sit and actually listen to the experts. And the experts are not generally the people that have got professional backgrounds in this arena. The experts are families.
We were just as much developing it as much as the coordinators were, you know what I mean? as well as the other families. And that, I mean, you know, if you can make something like that work and get some of your ideas across, hopefully good ideas across, you know what I mean, and implement some of them, you know what I mean, I think it's like I've said before, it's the ultimate in giving back, you know what I mean. It's absolute gold.
So that's just a few of our families, and I hope that gives you a bit more of a feel for, and it's very hard in 20 minutes to get a feel for it, but when you really are making something and creating something with the people that are going to use it, you get so much closer to the mark. And they are so honest and brutally honest. And sometimes, you know, you'd spend all this time coming up with what you thought was awesome. And then you would take it out and they'd just go, that's shit. I'm not using that. And then you throw it out and you start again. So yes, there's a huge investment up front to come up with that, and that's what a lot of people have said is, but isn't that really expensive? Well, it's not really expensive because we're not creating fully polished ideas. Often it was scribbles on pieces of paper. But secondly, the cost saving that you make down the track because of the early investment is potentially huge. So where are we now? Family by Family is now being implemented in a second area in South Australia, and what we're going through now is really designing what it looks like to pick something up and put it somewhere else. Now we all know it's not that easy, and I think it's people that do think it's that easy that often run into a lot of trouble. So we're currently designing what we call a scoping phase. So we're out in our second area at Playford, and we're hanging out with families out there, we're testing out materials, we're talking to them about stress, we're hanging out and just getting to know them. And yes, there's some fundamentals of Family by Family that won't change. There's some things that make it Family by Family, e.g. linking families up. But how we train families, how we bring families together, how we talk about things, those things are all up for grabs. And those things can be specifically fit to specific communities, so it feels like theirs. And also it then creates a much stronger buy-in from them, and they're much more likely to own it. And it's hard to pick it up from the video, but if you spend any time out in Marion, Family by Family feels very family owned. They do own it, it's theirs, and we merely sit in the background and enable it and keep things on track for them and provide them with the resources. So that is a 20-minute version of Family by Family, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Thanks for inviting me along to talk about some of the things we're doing, and really this bubbling up of, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in WA, and this is a bit of an overview of what's going on. So social innovation in Western Australia, I'll talk a bit more about that later, but we've actually been nationally recognised through the Foundation for Young Australians as a young social pioneer, and also by Ant Hill magazine through their 30 under 30 program. So we're getting some national interest. What I'll probably run through is just a bit of maybe a look at why innovation and why the urgency for innovating and also partnering with across organisations is really needed in Western Australia, and look at sort of really broadly and then bring it back down to locally what's happening here. Then I'll talk a little bit about SEWA, so Social Innovation in Western Australia, and then talk about some of the innovation projects that we're working on and some of the good things that are happening in WA. So this is literally, this picture's a good one. So literally the sun is setting on oil. So talking big, we're really in this winding down of the oil era. So the last 150 years have been turbo-fueled by cheap oil. Water is running out, or scarce and becoming scarcer. So I haven't actually talked about climate change in here, but that just makes these issues greater. The last two, and our agricultural industry, as Rob would know, is heavily reliant on water and oil and the access to both of those. We'll just hit 7 billion people, so that's a big one. And we'll probably be up to 9 billion by 2040. 2040 is sort of the crossroads of where those previous three really hit. So my brother's a stockbroker, and this has been his position for the last 3 years. Not so much the global financial collapse, but more about how complex our world is. So really looking at the complexity of the world we live in and how something happening in Greece affects our stock market, which is pretty well known, but that is just with the hyper-connected world we live in is accelerating. this was a result, so this is the London riots, where a lot of these people were generally considered as society had left them behind, and a lot of the reasons they gave for this sort of action was that they couldn't actually see a future for themselves. So there's deep problems there. And this is more recently, so the Occupy movement, this was in Occupy Wall Street in New York, but not so much around global greed, but more the fact that this started within a month and then was in hundreds of cities across the globe within that amount of time, and also across Australia as well, more prevalently in Melbourne. But again, this has come from youth not actually seeing how they can be part of the system, and then trying to find new ways to express that, plus a whole lot of other complex things, and yeah, I won't talk about that. But all of this is leading up to, we live in a really complex world, and leading on from what Rob had talked about, and we need to find, what we're doing now, we need to find new solutions to tackle this. Otherwise this sort of stuff's going to keep happening. So hold on, we live in WA. It's sunny, there's no problems here. We've got pretty good beaches, although there's less people on them since shark attacks, but everything's pretty good, but probably not so much. We've got this happening, which was talked about, so the mining, steady period of economic growth or something like that, I think the Premier refers to it as, but this is going to keep going, this isn't stopping. And what that brings in the next sort of 15 to 20 years is $250 billion of investment in resources projects, which a lot of you are probably aware of. But what isn't being talked about is what will that actually do to our social infrastructure, so to our communities, to the way we work, how the disadvantaged will be looked after, which is already really stretched. So yeah, what systems are we putting in place to come up with new ideas to tackle these issues, which, I mean, who even knows what in 20 years what's going to happen. So social innovation in West Australia. So we set up because there was really no support for social entrepreneurs in WA to get their ideas off the ground, so people with ideas for high impact social enterprises to make them happen. So we set up more broadly with the long-term vision of really facilitating and co-creating that, there's some more buzzwords, but facilitating and co-creating that social social infrastructure over the next sort of 30 years, because we're going to need new ideas. The stuff we're doing now isn't working. So our mission is to support entrepreneurs, communities and business to deliver social good through innovation, and I'll explain how that works. We do a lot of events and things, and we started off sort of just as a loose network, but that's sort of formalised as there's really a niche here which isn't being addressed by government, not-for-profit sector or corporates. So what we actually deliver, because we often get asked what do we actually deliver, what do we do? So Caroline was talking about two of these, which was social impact measurement, so actually measuring your impact, which we do pretty poorly, and it is really hard. So we look at social return on investment as a methodology for that, and have been working with St Bartholomew's to actually measure the impact of their programs. What that then allows us to do is look at social enterprise capacity building. So we're working with social traders based out of Melbourne, and we actually lobbied pretty hard because they have a national agenda and national budgets through federal funding, but actually weren't doing anything in WA. So we have some different pots of money around delivering some social enterprise capacity building. And social enterprise is using the market system to deliver social good. So it could be a cafe that employs homeless people, but it's in a sustainable way. Design thinking, so we just saw a great example of design thinking in action, and co-creating solutions with the actual end users. So we've got a PhD in design, and he's working on a number of projects at the moment around looking at client-centered service design and then also delivery. And then we do a bunch of project design and management, which I'll talk about now. So design thinking, I don't think I need to go into this. So design thinking, it's globally recognised user-centric problem-solving methodology, so it's not new. It's been around for a while. It just isn't really used in WA. So this covers off business model redesign, user journey and experience mapping, new service prototyping, and co-design and co-creation. And yeah, we'll be sharing more of this, but we've had a good cover off of that process. So we've got a bunch of partners, and our model is built on partnerships. So we're not government funded. We're not an NG. Well, we're set up as a not-for-profit, but profit for purpose business model, where the revenues that we generate through the different things we do make our organisation sustainable. We're not sustainable yet, but we're hoping to be in the next sort of 12 months. So I'll talk a bit more about these partners, but these partnerships aren't just here's money, go and do good stuff. They're actually a lot deeper than that, and I can run through those. We're also part of the Australian Social Innovation, Entrepreneurship and Enterprise Alliance, which the Australian Centre for Social Innovation is part of, because a lot of these organisations have national footprints, but if you don't have someone in Western Australia, then it's hard to get meetings with people. It's, you know, we keep to ourselves. So we're bringing in a number of these programs. Social Traders is the first one, but we're looking at the School for Social Entrepreneurs in the next few years. So this is our, one of the things around innovation is since I've been working in this space, is there's a lot of talk, sort of endless talk. So what we wanted to do was look at, right, what's something that's a need right now, and easy access to space and networks to build your enterprise, whether it's social or commercial, is actually really hard in WA to get your idea off the ground. So we've started to set up a place called Space Cubed, which is a co-working collaboration and innovation space at 45 St George's Terrace, so in the middle of the city. It's 550 square metres space, and this is in collaboration with Stockland, which is a large property management group. Now, what a lot of people usually ask, what did Stockland actually get out of it? What are they, you know, corporate social responsibility, but really is it greenwashing? So what Stockland get out of this is it's a move from them just giving to charity to them partnering with a not-for-profit to deliver a community space and a community asset, really, in the middle of the city, which is also pretty handy. Secondly, their staff are going to be volunteering into the social enterprises that start up in this space. And thirdly, once they're successful, or once they're getting off the ground, they can then move those startups into other retail or commercial space, which they own all over the joint. The model for this is based on an international model, but then again tweaked for WA. So we did a co-creation event, as you do. We had about 70 people from all different sectors turn up for it. And by the end of this, we really identified that to move this forward, business and government play such an important role in West Australia. So the model we've set up is a third social and environmental entrepreneurs, a third technology and creative industry startups, and a third government and corporate projects. This event had pretty much 70 people from that mix of groups. But when we opened the space, yeah, we really want to have that mix in there, and we've already got a lot of people inquiring about it. So there's some more. So we had Hassel do our design work, so they came on board to do a lot of the design work. And now we've got Northerly have come on board as our building partners. And all of these have the same sort of arrangements where they need to engage their staff and through actually delivering socially responsible projects. And this is a way they can do that. So that's more on the co-creation event. So again, this model, I think really what this relates back to from Terry was talking about it, is building social capital. So this provides those soft networks and provides a home for people that want to start up their ideas. It being in the middle of the city is an advantage, but I don't think that's the most important thing. We're also looking at a digital, so already online there's a lot of work being done to build the community, and now we actually do a soft opening in the middle of December, which we will then basically continue that co-creation process. We're starting up just with the first module, which I don't have on here, but it's just first pretty much a community area, a space for 20 or 30 people for hot desks, and then we will build it out from there because it is a big space. The model for the space is to have it's a membership based, so people can just get a normal membership, which is $20 a month, where they get access to all the events and that soft network infrastructure. And then there's space, so you can rent a desk basically for 10, 50, 100 unlimited hours a month, and it caps out at $600 a month, so it's pretty good for startups. We're also getting a lot of interest from corporations wanting to be involved, where they are really seeing that they need their staff, to remain competitive, they need to offer the best opportunities for their staff to get involved in community projects, and this is a way for them to centralise that. This is actually already happening in Geraldton, so there might be Geraldton on the video, but beaming in. But this is opened in September, City Hive Geraldton, which was set up by a social entrepreneur there. They already have 200 members, so it's pretty significant in such a short amount of time. I think the local Chamber of Commerce hates them, but they're making inroads and really providing those enabling environments for people to get their ideas off the ground. One of the projects that we're just starting to work on, and we're still working out all the details on, is codenamed CoLab at the moment, which is with Department of Agriculture, and looking at sort of okay, we can offer the design thinking is, as was pointed out, is quite an expensive process. Well, not expensive considered to the outcomes, but what we want to look at is how does government easily access in Western Australia these sort of services, because you know, from the family by family demonstration, it's really great stuff, but how do you actually access it? So CoLab's designed to be, it's based on, we're still working out what it's based on, but we're looking at the model of MindLab in Denmark, which some of you might be aware of, where government sort of separated its innovation function from individual departments, recognising that government as a whole isn't great at innovating, but individuals within government have some great ideas. So this is then in place to facilitate those ideas and get them off the ground. So we're just starting this. It's literally at the scoping stage. So we'd be interested in talking to anyone else, any other departments that want to be involved. So how can the West Australian Public Service get involved in some of the things we're doing? One is through the design thinking, and we're working on that at the moment. Joint projects and ventures. So a good example is with Stockland. That's a joint project with them where they're getting a lot of value from that and really contributing to building that that innovation infrastructure for WA. We also had a lot of interest from that project, which isn't open yet, but is opening in December, from other organisations in regional areas, and we've already got, you know, City Hive in Geraldton. So we're starting to get this network of networks of places where people can get their ideas off the ground. Joining Space Cube. So at the moment we're looking for corporate and government and not-for-profit partnerships, but deeper than just $5,000 and your logos on the building. We're looking for actual deep partnerships where it provides those opportunities to your staff to really be engaged in that sort of space and that sort of thinking. Measuring social impact. So most government departments have some sort of activity that impacts, you know, what is happening in communities. This is a way to measure the social, environmental and financial impact of that. And then also just get involved. So we're running events and all sorts of activities and get speakers over, and so get involved in that sort of stuff because there's a lot to learn and really need to, I guess, linking all of this back to, we've got some massive problems ahead. It's not going to be an easy sort of 30 years. By 2040, when all that's supposed to come to head, I'll be in my 50s. So I'm still well and truly kicking and having to deal with this stuff. So this is a way that we can start getting the ball rolling now and really empower those entrepreneurs and the people who want to make the change to actually get it done. So that's where we're at. And yeah, look forward to talking to people soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brodie.